Today we're looking at The Substance. The Substance is a movie following a fading and aging Hollywood star, Elizabeth Sparkle, as she declines into insanity due to gradually fading out of her so-called niche. Amid this tear, a younger, quote, better version of herself is born. They compete for time and attention while both going down an ugly, dead-end road. The sound design in this film is themed in itself. The personality is jumping off the screen with the sound choice, let alone the score. From the distorted, blown-out synths and hidden sonic motifs to the almost comedic contrast between the hyper-dramatized gore and the overblown sparkle sounds. There's so much to unpack in this horrifying film. So why don't we start with that contrast? Right off the bat, we're introduced with this extreme side of the sound design. We're hit with the detailed sound of eggs splitting. So this is an obvious visual representation of the movie, but it works sonically as well, as just a few minutes later we're hit with this gigantic splat on the ground. These are both so clearly overdone, and it gets done again in the next scene just a few minutes later.
When was that? Back in the 30s? What? For King Kong?
Now we get even deeper with this next scene when he's chewing the shrimp. This is the first instance that we get the sounds of the monster and the deep underwater crunch that goes with all of these sounds that you'll hear throughout the rest of the movie.
People just love that. So you know what I mean? People are just people.
They're absolutely overdone, and we'll see the other side to it soon, right after this gruesome Foley clip of picking up the paper. This is when the younger version of Elizabeth Sparkle comes in, painting a complete opposite picture of these gore sounds you've been hearing throughout the movie so far. There's the whole sequence where she's becoming herself and the gruesome monster sounds are there. But as soon as that ends and she starts to live her own life, we get these crispy, bright, twinkly sounds that are littered through everything she does. Almost cartoony in a way. But then there's the interesting part when they fuse. And this is done really creatively with all of these sounds that sort of touch both sides, or whether the first clip here where the younger version is living her life, but yet it's still gruesome. And the clip after where she gives the wink again, but the wink sounds different. Listen here. At this point in the movie, you're finding out that the dark side of Elizabeth Sparkle in this younger version is slowly coming out, and that's coming out in the sounds and on the screen. You can hear how both sides are fusing into one another. It's a great storytelling technique, and I can't get enough of it. There's this beautiful scene where you can hear the clapping and wonderful sounds of this TV talk show, which is already cheesy enough, but you get the gruesome step of Elizabeth Sparkle in her almost monster phase that explains this point really well.
Sue! You popped up out of nowhere.
Now, I think this works so well, especially in the beginning of the movie, because of these tactile sounds that make you lean in. The Foley is played way high, forcing you to listen in to every tiny sound that you hear. I'll show you some examples. Now, I'm not EQing or playing up any of these sounds at all. This is how it is in the movie. And they didn't shy away from this either, even the parts that don't matter for listening in hard, like these footsteps, which are super loud.
Where have you been? We've all been wanting to have a drink with you.
These sound designers made you listen super hard. It's like it hits you harder with the gore sounds that come in later.
You of all people know this.
now is maybe one of my favorite parts of the movie, which is the hidden stuff that you might not catch. I've noticed a lot of this with the monster arc. They use sounds that could be interpreted as in the score or in the background, but are all kind of hinting to this groaning, loud, suffering monster that's inside Elizabeth. Take a listen here. The first instance of this comes a few minutes into the movie when Elizabeth Sparkle opens the door, and you can hear this background swell that almost sounds like a growl of some sort. Next up is when the doctor is feeling her back. The same sort of growl comes in. Listen here.
Is there a problem?
No, it's perfect.
This next one sounds like it's tied into the score, but it's the same idea. It becomes more evident when she's walking to pick up her substance. And even gets its own little transition scene here. It gets more aggressive when Elizabeth takes the substance for the first time. And slowly turns into these underwater sounds that we heard before. We come full circle when these sounds become more clear and she actually hears them herself. Take a listen here. Now this ties into Elizabeth starting to know that she is the monster. But we don't get that from Sue until the end of the movie, with this beautiful pitch down cough that is so obvious, but works so well. They even bring back that ominous hum that we heard earlier, but in Sue's perspective, realizing that she's turning into something else. And just to show you the climax of all this monster talk, the end of the movie shows it quite well. This growl is maybe the coolest part.
Boobs aren't in the middle of her face instead of that nose.
And for a final honorable mention of this category, I'd like to track the footsteps throughout the movie. In the beginning sounding quite normal, to the gruesome stuff, a few transitions in. Progressively getting worse. Now I can get into some of the crazy, more specific elements of sound design that I've noticed throughout this movie. This first scene is absolutely wild. Just take a listen to the whole thing with what mixing choices they made, the transitions, the super detailed Foley, and how it all plays into Elizabeth's state of mind at that moment. How it switches from the overwhelming state of her outside life to her internal life. And most evidently, the volume change between the vacuum and the windows versus when it's blocked by a wall. I think it's pretty hilarious. Again, the perspective of that scene, showing different points of view of the same location in just 40 seconds or so. This gets you warmed up for some of the crazy transitions that happen later.
You're hired. Who has time to say that? We're gonna make you Cindy. It's shorter.
Now with that, you probably got a sense of the rhythm that this film carries. There's tons of scenes where the rhythm carries with music or without that just blow you away. Try to catch the rhythm in this next scene. The F off that Elizabeth says almost sounds like a drop in some EDM song. I'll give it some time to build. Most notably, the 4 last steps in that scene are tied exactly to the beat of the music. This next scene even turns that up a notch. Every Foley movement is on par, and pay attention to Sue's head when it hits the stairs. Now what's funny about this is that if you time those head hits exactly to the picture, they would not sync up. But the sound designers just nudge them a little bit so they tie up to the beat of the music, and it makes everything feel more locked in and keeps the viewer immersed. To show you what I mean, I'll put my own sounds over the actual head hits and see if it lines up with the music. In this first clip, I replaced the whole head hit sequence with my own sounds that are actually on sync. And now I'll show you the same sequence, but the head hits are on the music beats. Now I'll play both inside of Pro Tools so you can actually see the transients and how they line up. Here's the actual synced up head hits. And now synced up to the music. Now by looking at this, you can see that the red is the actual head hits and the purple is the synced up to the music head hits. And it's clear to see why they use the music head hits. It sounds way better and cleaner, and it's just tighter overall. I really love to look at these two side by side to see just the difference in frames and transients that they have. As you can see, the actual head hits in red are behind or in front by a frame each in either direction, and there's actually one head hit added at the end for the actual head hits. All of this doesn't matter though, because it sounds way better tied up to the music, and you definitely wouldn't notice the music head hits being out of sync unless you looked at it really in depth like we do right now. They made the right choice, and it keeps everybody more locked in. Let's break down a few of my favorite synth sounds used in this movie. The first thing I notice is these 4 tight tinnitus sounds here laid out in this spectrogram. It almost creates different levels of confusion inside of her mind. The next thing to notice, which is clearly laid out in the spectrogram, is this blank space. It's hard to do anything because there's nothing really there. It looks like it was chopped straight out of the spectrogram. Then there's this top chunk here, which is just a hard cutoff at 15K. The only thing that pokes out are these 2 tiny blood drops. And last but not least, the beautiful crunch in the middle. The use of the tinnitus sound, the low pass filter, and the crunching distorted synths are all things that come back time and time again in these breakdown sequences. Let's look at another example here. To top it all off, I have to show you this final clip. It is probably one of my favorites in the whole movie. Here they just use the low pass and distortion, but it is super effective. And if you're squeamish, maybe go 10 seconds ahead. Now that that's done, I'll show you some more synth-specific scenes that really get to me. These all have something in common. They all use jump scares to kind of achieve the same effect. I'll give them some time to build.
Oh no, I can't stop. She just...
So smile!
And for an honorable mention, I have to show this synth clip. For reference, this is when you first see Elizabeth transitioning into Sue. When using synths like this, it creates an opportunity to be super abstract. These next clips showcase sounds that have nothing to do with the actual scene, but are used to enhance the scene, almost provocatively. Pay attention to the knife sound in these next two clips. Although there is no visual of any knife being unsheathed, that is the primary sound used in those two clips. It gets amped up here with the over-the-top whooshes.
You know.
And the grand finale of abstract sounds being this gnarly chainsaw coming out of this egg beater. Finally, I want to talk about my absolute favorites in this movie. These clips use the best part of all the segments we talked about, tying them together reminding me how much I love the sound design in this movie. Pay attention to the syncopation in this first clip. I broke this down into 3 sections. The first being the yellow spots, which are silent. The second being the blue, which is the whoosh. And the third being the brutal hit and tail. Let's hear it in full speed again. The reason the hit hits so hard is because of this syncopation. The mixers decided to leave silence before the whoosh and the hit. If there were music or BGs played up in this sequence, you would not hear the clarity and intensity that these sounds produce on their own. This is a prime example of a great mix and choosing your sounds wisely. It's clear and to the point, and most importantly, intentional. As we listen again, you'll hear everything dip out before this tiny sequence. There's no music, no breaths, no other sounds going on except for a little bit of backgrounds. This same technique is used in this next clip as well. Try to catch it. The silence you hear before and after that crunch is essential for making it hit that hard. Finally, we find ourselves with the last clip I want to showcase here. It brings together a lot of what we just talked about, from the distortion and the low pass to the gory Foley and callback to the egg split at the beginning of the movie. And for no reason in particular, maybe my favorite sound in the whole movie, the motif of that famous synth we've been hearing. Sit back and listen to the amazing colors that they present here. To me, I think that's everything I love about this movie in one clip. I want to show a big appreciation for the whole sound team on this movie. There's a lot to unpack here. I'm sure I didn't get even the surface level of it, but it's truly something to behold. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this, as I think it shows what a cohesive and understanding team can do with a great movie. Go watch The Substance if you haven't already. If you're a sound designer, I hope you can use some of these techniques to help you, or if you're just a movie lover, I hope that you can appreciate what often gets overlooked. Catch you on the next one.